going to start the meeting. We've got, this is Monday, the 2nd of December, and we are having the scrutiny meeting for Oxford City Council. First of all, we have Councillor Mallock as a first apologies. Any other apologies around the room? No? Okay. So then declarations of interest. Anyone on the items today? No. Chair's announcements. Well, I'd like to welcome Hannah, who is sitting in the corner over here. Give us a wave, Hannah. She has just recently joined the council and will be supporting us with the meeting. So thanks to her. And we've got Celeste with us as normal. Welcome. Just want to let you know that in between the last meeting and now, as Chair of Scrutiny, I've had to approve some urgent items that have come through the council, and we'll address those later in the additional items on the forward plan, but I just wanted to alert you to that just for the record. So we'll come back to that later. Essentially, it's where there isn't enough time to go through a certain process. There is a different process that is followed, and the Chair of Scrutiny has to review an item. So yeah, just to inform you of that. Moving on to the fourth standing item, which is the minutes of the last meeting. We don't have the meeting minutes for the 18th, but we do have those of the 4th of November, which are in the supplementary agenda. So has anyone got any comment on those, or are you happy to approve them? Yeah, all good. Silence. Yeah, so I'm assuming that's all good. Thank you. So we will take those as approved, please. Celeste, thank you. So for today's agenda, we are going to move on to the Authority Monitoring Report and Infrastructure Funding Statement, first of all. This was originally item number 8, and the reason for this is we've got one of the cabinet members who's joining us has to be elsewhere very shortly, so we're going to have that first of all. So I would like to item number 8. So that is, we'll do the work plan and forward plan and report back on recommendations at the end, just in the interest of time for our participants. So if I can invite up Louise Upton, cabinet member for planning, who is here in person. I think we've got David Butler as well. Thank you, David, head of planning and regulatory services, who are here. We've also got online a number of people supporting us. We've got Sarah Harrison, who is the planning policy team leader, Lorraine Freeman, the SIL data analysis and reporting team leader, and Rachel Nixon, who is a principal planner. So welcome to all of you here today. Okay, so I think without further ado, I think I'll ask Louise to, and David also to add to that, to introduce the report, please. So.
Hey, thank you very much, Old Marston Parish Council. Well, thank you for letting me get there on time. Yes, so the Authority Monitoring Report, which is a statutory requirement, we have to do one every year, and sort of sets out how well we're doing at seeing through our own planning policies. And it looks at 3 overarching objectives within it, which is the strong, responsive and competitive economy, sort of building vibrant and healthy communities, and protecting and enhancing our both natural and our built environment. So you will see, and I could pick out some highlights from it, but hopefully you have all read it, but you'll see sort of employment land. We've had a massive increase in employment land as we've sort of building out the science and business parks. We've got this massive demand for extra R&D space, literally gone through the roof. Buildings going up taller. There's statements around the number of sort of students living out, because we do have these policies to try and limit the number of students from both universities that live out, to try and protect the housing in the city for residents who live here. And both those policies have kept numbers very low. I think the old Oxford University has tried very hard to accommodate most of its students, so they've actually only got about 800 living out. Brook's not doing so well with 3,700 living out, but anyway, it could be worse. Various things looking at the vitality of our city and our district centres, which has been made a bit more difficult by the change in use class definitions that the last government did. But Cowley, Headington, Summertown, City Centre are still doing reasonably well at sort of maintaining their retail and entertainment functions. Housing, 365 houses built in Oxford this year, which is brilliant. And just shy of 1,000 affordable homes built of all sorts of types since the start of that local plan period. So all good things there. I'm sure you'll find some other challenges you might want to ask about through it. And then, of course, there's the infrastructure funding statement, which has got the details of all of the community infrastructure levy and the Section 106 funds that have come in associated with lots of different planning permissions over the last few years. And there's lists of what has come in, what it was designed to be spent on, and to some extent what it has been spent on. We've got the list of the capital projects that the SIL should be funding. So I'll leave it there. I'll see if David has anything to add. And as usual, the tricky questions will be answered by officers. But thank you.
Thank you, Louise. David, over to you.
Thanks, Councillor Upton. Obviously a very thorough introduction. I guess just to add then, these documents after today will go onto Cabinet and then be published on our website alongside our historic IFSs and AMRs. So just an opportunity then for the public at large to be able to see the kind of information that we're trying to share and make as transparent as possible about all the work that planning does.
Thank you very much. No, we appreciate all the information shared. I'm sure there's going to be some questions from around the table. What I think I'd like us to do, if it's okay by everyone, we first of all structure our questions. If we do want to generate some recommendations, then we will do that afterwards once we've sort of asked our round of questions. And just to make it easier for Louise and David, we'll take a few questions at a time, if that's okay. Ideally around a similar theme, but I know that that's not always possible. So anyone like to start with any questions? Simon, please. Thank you.
Sorry, yeah. How do we know that all that student accommodation is being used by students and not sitting empty, with them finding possibly more appealing options in our houses around the city? And does the student accommodation include the sort of, they seem to be increasingly private blocks rather than blocks built by Brooks?
Yeah, just let's see. Has anyone got any similar questions on the student? Yeah, thank you. Edward, sorry.
Right. Okay. So as been noted, there's been a significant increase in the Brooks student in private rented sector involvement for housing versus previous years. It seems to have increased quite exponentially, given that the 3 years prior had been around the same figure. So why are we seeing that increase this year versus the 3 years prior? And do we see that continuing to be an increasing pressure on the private rented sector?
And actually, just to add, because I have a question around this myself, when new student accommodation is being created, how can we ensure that it is actually being used by Brooks students or the university students that need that? Because I understand, for instance, the Tesco's building above the Cowley on the Cowley Road, that is used by as a private, more a private student accommodation, and not necessarily by students at these universities. So I'm just wondering how you tie then the new student accommodation that's been created to the demand from the established universities, who are intended to fill that accommodation. Thank you.
I believe Sarah's going to pick those up.
I'll pick those up.
Sarah.
Tell me if I've forgotten any. I try to write notes. So starting with what kind of accommodation counts, as it were. At the moment, the policy will only count accommodation which is managed by the universities. So it might not be their own accommodation, but at the moment we look to make sure that the university has nomination rights. So some of the private accommodation that's built, they will come to an arrangement where they have some management say, and they place their students in those blocks. So that's the kind of accommodation that we count, not just any private accommodation. In terms of whether it's empty, we don't really have much control over that, but there's no particular signs that we can see that there is accommodation sitting empty. The universities are still trying to provide more accommodation. It's not that they're having a problem filling it, but obviously there's always going to be a few which are less popular with students, and we do know that there are a few which are harder for them to fill. But generally, I don't think that's a particular issue. There has been a very large increase in the number of students at Oxford Brookes University, which you can see in the main annual monitoring report in the last year. I can tell you the figure, which there were in total 19,586 students at Oxford Brookes this year, and that compares to 16,050 the year before, and around 16,000 from about 2016. That is a very big increase, but there's not been that big an increase in the number of students that are living out, because a lot of those students are on placements. So actually, the number of students needing accommodation in Oxford has only gone up by about 1,000, and the amount of university provided student accommodation has gone up by a few hundred. So the difference in the number of students that we count as living outside of university provided accommodation was 2,908 in the monitoring year before, and this one is 3,720. So it has gone up, but nothing like compared to the amount of additional students that they've had. But we do see this as a growing, and we're expecting this problem to grow further, which is part of the reason that as we were producing the new local plan and looking into this for revising the policy, we did have to increase the thresholds for Oxford Brookes, and it might be that there is more difficulty for them meeting this. It's because of their plans for growth overall, and they've had some losses of accommodation, which they are slowly trying to rectify. But yes, it could potentially be a growing problem. Was that all of the questions? Have I missed some?
And how tying the accommodation to the specific universities as opposed to being filled by sort of these private providers that are coming up in addition, which don't have a cap in numbers? Thank you.
Yes, sorry. This is difficult. A long time ago, the policy restricted new student accommodation to the two universities only, but it's a long time ago that we lost that policy approach, because it is not, for want of a better word, fair in planning terms to be so restricted to those two institutions, and there couldn't be a justification for it. We did try to find evidence to support it again after we lost it the first time, and we failed to do that again. So what we do is say that the accommodation has to be taken by full-time students on courses of a year or more, which does restrict what kind of courses they're on. So it can't just be any language students. We can't always find information about this, but we do try with student evidence-based papers that we do to find out what's happening. We found that it was a growing problem, but recently it's a lot less of an issue. I think since COVID hit and things like Brexit, it has reduced the number of students coming from those other institutions taking up places. But we've done as much as we can with policy with restricting the type of students that can occupy student accommodation, but we can't go any further to limit it to those two university institutions.
Okay, and we might have some follow-up questions. Councillor Latif, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Louise and David, for presenting the report as well. Just a follow-up on the question. I don't know if it's the question's for you necessarily, Sarah. It might be for Louise. But just in answer to Councillor Mundy's question, you said that the number of students going into the private rented market is about 800 new students this year compared to previous year. Now, I suspect most of those will probably be going into HMOs, but there's still houses that are not available in the private rented market now in Oxford. And I know Louise, to start with, said, you know, we've had some great news about the new houses that have been built in Oxford in the order of about 300 or so. But my very basic math suggests that if there's 800 students and there's 4 or 5 of them to a house, that's about 160 houses potentially that we've lost from the private rented market in Oxford. And so I just wonder, I mean, house building is not easy and quick, and there's some real challenges there. You know, it's years really before we see that kind of you know, any policy feeding through to actual changes. But it seems like half the work's been undone by a significant rise in the number of students that were entering the private rented market. And I just wonder whether the focus maybe ought to be more on looking at how many students are in the private rented market as opposed to house building. Because as I say, 300 is a pretty good number, but you know, half of that's been undone this year.
Thank you. Any other follow-up questions? I think, yeah, and Councillor Tino, I have one as well.
What can we do to restrict the numbers, particularly at Brooks, and the number of students they're admitting? Is there anything we can do in planning terms?
And then just to follow up actually on the question around those who are students not attending Brooks or the university, I understand that there is a levy that is that the universities have to provide for related to the students that live out if they're not able to accommodate them. Why do we not have such a levy, let's say, on these other higher educational institutions? Why is it just those 2 universities? And is there anything that can be done to replicate that approach for these other institutions as well? Otherwise, we're going to basically be losing more and more accommodation for the higher educational sector for short-term stay, even if it is just 1 year, which again stops families living in Oxford. So any answer to that as well, please? Yeah, and I think Louise has got an answer as well. So we'll come to whoever would like to go first out of the.
Because I'll try and then I'll hand over to Sarah. But yeah, Councillor Tiff, you're absolutely right, and it's intensely frustrating that we are losing family homes to students. My understanding is that the last time we did a local plan, we tried very hard to have lower caps, but the inspectors wouldn't allow it, or we believe that wouldn't get through, because we in theory have to allow our universities to thrive. So I think our officers tried as hard as they could to get caps as low as possible, but the university to some extent have to agree, because otherwise they go and put in representations to the local plan saying they object to these, and then we can have it changed by an inspector. So I would say we would love to have lower numbers. Well, I would, but I think officers thought that they got them as low as they could. Is that about right, Sarah or David?
I'll pick up a little bit on that, and then Sarah can correct me. I think we're dealing with land use policy, so we're you know, this is what the plan does, and planning does. It looks at what the land is being used for. So we can't say that university can grow to X and that can grow to Y. That is beyond our remit and beyond our responsibilities to be able to do that. We have levers that we pull in planning terms, so particularly around HMOs, for example. Obviously, we have an Article 4, which restricts all, you need to apply for planning permission for all HMOs, which isn't the case unless we do that. And then we've got a series of policies around concentration levels and saturation levels to make sure that we don't lose whole streets and communities over to HMOs. Obviously, not all HMOs go to students. Inevitably, there are a degree of young professionals live in HMOs, and they perform an important function there. But what we're trying to do is make sure that we have a good mixed communities with HMOs and private rented sector, and obviously traditional housing stock as well. The inevitable consequence is that as with all housing within the city, there's a huge competition from lots of people who need that housing for lots of different reasons, and we need to try and, as best we can, accommodate all reasonable options. But what we're unable to do, particularly in planning terms, is to pick a winner over, that university, that college, or that use. Which I think answered most of those questions, apart from the levy element. Sarah, are you able to pick up on that one?
Does that mean the threshold, as in we've got this threshold policy for the universities, but we don't apply it to other institutions? And I think there's a number of reasons for that. The universities, we want to encourage them to put their students in university provided accommodation to keep them out of the general market. Other institutions don't tend to have accommodation in the general market as much. And also, it's not necessarily that we're trying to push them to have their students in student accommodation, because then that's conflicting with the universities as well. But as David says, we can't really prevent the growth of any of these institutions, because that's well outside of planning's remit, be that the universities or other institutions. So I'm not sure that a threshold would be a particularly helpful approach. The one place where they conflict the most with the market is if they're taking what could be a house for boarding accommodation. And we did try to, or we are trying to look at bringing in a policy which manages that. At the moment, there's not really one that does that. So there can be more and more private market housing turning into boarding accommodation for the other institutions.
Thank you. Do we have some follow-ups? I think Councillor Artino, any further on this particular point, and then other points within this FAST report as well? Councillor Artino.
Yeah, I'm not convinced that all student accommodation is in use. I think I remember Crescent Road site being almost completely empty at one time. Is there not a way that we can monitor whether it is in use or not? And if it isn't, are we able to sort of pose some sort of sanction in the way we do on an empty property, or try and get that in use for us for temporary accommodation?
Hopefully you heard that question. I have a follow-up question about whether you have data also on these other educational institutions and how the students are being accommodated, and is that something that is routinely collected, and if not, you know, can that be done? So at least we have better data on that, even if we can't control it. Any other student accommodation questions? No. Okay, back to you, Sarah, please. Thank you.
Okay. I think, as I said before, there are always less popular accommodation blocks, and we do know that Crescent Hall was one that was more difficult to fill, because the university was looking to temporarily use it to accommodate students who weren't necessarily on courses of a year or more. They were looking to redevelop the site, and I think there's two problems with it. One is the age and quality of the accommodation, and the other is the location. But ultimately, I think they've probably decided that the accommodation is worth keeping in that location, but needs to be redeveloped. So there are always the odd site which is less popular, but we do tend to know about those, because they will want to use them for something, and then they would have to come to us because of planning conditions which restrict the use. But they're not generally going to want it sitting there not being used at all. The other question, sorry, in answering that, I've completely forgotten what it was.
Yeah, whether you gather the data on the other students, and if not, could that be something that could at least be done so you could track it?
We have tried our best. We have a student accommodation needs assessment. It's not reported in the AMR, and at the moment, none of the information is at the forefront of my mind, but we did attempt to get an understanding of the numbers of students and where they were being accommodated. And a lot of the time it's things like homestays, or they're not on courses of a year, so they might be in student accommodation in the summer holidays and outside of term times, for example, which is really the most desirable approach because it's not needing any extra accommodation. And we were finding that was the majority of how they were being accommodated.
Thank you. Have we got any other questions on this report, either related to this or other topics in the broad report? Yeah, please, other topics as well. while you're thinking about that, everybody, just a question from my side. So one is around the local plan. And if given that there may be a gap in us having a local plan in the early 2026, what are then the implications of both this entire report that we have before us, and you're reporting on that during that gap period, but also other implications for related to student accommodation, and whether then that's going to get converted, the lots are going to, houses are going to be converted to student accommodation, because there's that policy gap. And also, is there any way that we can look at the implications of this to the City Council's finances? Not the local plan gap, but just the high levels of student accommodation. Because my understanding is that we as a council don't get money for waste disposal from these students because they're not paying council tax, but clearly any increase is going to be costing us more money as a council to clear the bins, for instance. So what can be done there? And then in a different topic, which relates to the care home and extra care categories of accommodation, there seems to have been no extra care facilities and only a small number of care homes, and we've got an ageing population. Are there any particular barriers to extra care facilities being created in the city? Because it seems to be that there's a real gap in provision of that service to people who can't live in their homes, but are not quite at the level to live in a care home yet. So anything around that? Well, I'm hoping other people are coming up with questions as well, but in the meantime, maybe you could look at those. Thank you.
I'll take the first run at the local plan and the implications. So obviously the AMR is effectively reporting data. So the implications for the AMR for the plan is minimal. It will continue to report that. The local plan will continue to be the appropriate statutory document to determine planning applications and contains all of our suite of policies, even as it begins to age. There will be inevitably a short period of time before we're able to get our new renewed local plan to a point where it's got weight. And if in that intervening period of time, then certain policies in the NPPF take a little bit more weight. We're not overly concerned about that because our local plan, does cover us to 2036. If we were sat here in 2030, we'd be, in a different conversation. But there's nothing there that would be of significant change for us in terms of our policies and what's coming forward. And the new NPPF, when it's published, actually goes some of the ways to where we were going to, for example, the removal of first homes, that kind of thing. Actually, the NPPF is where we were taking our local plan anyway. So it doesn't offer us any huge concerns. Clearly, we need to make sure we get a new draft local plan off the ground very, very quickly. And we are taking a paper to Cabinet and Council in January on those matters. And we can obviously discuss the implications in detail in what will undoubtedly be quite a thick report and good debate. In terms of the financial implications for waste disposal, I'm not sure of what we can do there. I'm not sure if Sarah or Louise have any pearls of wisdom, but I think that is just something in terms of students that we all have to take on the chin, just as our students leave Oxford and go to other cities, create waste that they can't be paid for there. Did you want to pick up care homes or?
I guess based on the care homes, I mean, we could enable them and the policies make it, we would welcome them, but we can't force anybody to use their land for that. So we would welcome more care homes and extra care facilities, particularly, as you say, though, we have an ageing population. I mean, I just remember the one that the University College built up Banbury Road the last few years, which was welcome. That was part of a planning application they brought forward. But say we can't force private developers to do it. We can encourage them and we can enable it and make it entirely possible within the local plan as it is, but we can't force them.
Councillor Ottino, please. Thank you.
Yeah, just I'm looking on the Appendix 2 and seal expenditure. So both Littlemore Parish Council and Blackbird Parish Council get seal money. there doesn't seem to be anywhere what they spent their money on, although you've got details on what the neighbourhood forums have spent their money on. Do we know what they spent their money on? Do we give them guidance? I mean, like where Blackbird Parish Council, for instance, don't own anything, so obviously they've got to spend it on either city or county things, probably. Do we have any idea what they're spending on, or do we give them guidance, suggestions?
We certainly give them guidance. Obviously, as a parish council, how they spend their money is, there. Lorraine's camera is frozen conveniently on a question for her, which we'll discuss tomorrow with her. They're very clear about what they can and can't spend their money on, but there's no requirement to give us the oversight, which we do require from neighbourhood forums, just because of the way that we, for neighbourhood forums, we hold the budget and then spend on their behalves. Whereas for the parish councils, the money is simply passed to them to look after by themselves, and they have statutory duties connected to that. So in short, no, we have no oversight, but we do give them a lot of guidance, particularly the formation and around neighbourhood plan formation.
Thank you. Any follow-ups on SIL? I do have, Edward, please, thank you.
Yeah, so I just wanted to know about exceptional relief circumstances. Exceptional circumstances relief for the SIL. I know that BMW was obviously a major business, local landowner that did get that in terms of the development that's going on at the car factory. Have there been any other major sites that have had significant exemptions from SIL?
The BMW application is the only application we have ever received. Ever.
Thank you. And follow up on SIL from my side, if I may, which is at the moment, the way that the information is provided around how SIL or Section 106 is then being allocated isn't divided up by ward. Do you have access to like a breakdown, particularly on the SIL side, of the portion that the council holds self to show whether SIL is being spent in the immediate area where the SIL is being generated? Because those are concerns that I'm aware of, that quite often the SIL is being allocated to other parts of the city and is not providing immediate infrastructure needs to the area where that is most significantly impacted by a development. So do you have any clarification on that, or is that something that could be done to break that data down in the future? Thank you.
So when we receive SIL, it's kind of split into a series of different pots, if you like. There's a small amount given over to the administration of the SIL regime, and then there's a neighbourhood portion. So that is either given to a parish council where there's a parish council, a neighbourhood forum where there's an adopted neighbourhood forum, or it's retained in a neighbourhood pot, which is predominantly what is then spent by ward members on various little SIL schemes that come forward for individual ward members. So that amount varies depending whether there's a neighbourhood plan in place or not, between 15 and 25%. And then the remaining larger chunk of money is set into what's called a strategic SIL pot. And that strategic infrastructure is the fairly short list of infrastructure that you have on page, I think 5. It's a list of projects which starts with CPZ Donington, and then you've got the flood alleviation scheme, Old Gasworks Bridges, 121 of your pack, I believe. So obviously those larger projects, and there's only a few there, can be broken down by location, but obviously that's fairly self-evident where they are. So the neighbourhood SIL portion is either dealt with by parish council, neighbourhood forum, or by ward member.
Thank you. Any further questions on that? No. Any questions on any other topics in this document before you? I have a question myself, which is around the self-build properties. There seem to be a number on the list, but no land seems to be coming forward to meet those requirements, what can be done to address that. And then secondly, around the housing target, in the cover note it says that we're performing under the target for housing, and that steps are being taken to maximise opportunities to meet the target. What are those steps that are being taken to maximise those opportunities, please? Thank you. And anyone else? Anyone that's not asked a question yet? No? Okay, thank you.
On self-build, there are actually a few self-build plots at the moment on sites which have come forward because of our policy requirement. Our policy requirement only applies to very large sites, and they have to have a proportion available as plots for people to buy for self-build, and that's to try and address the need as shown on our register. But the register is in two parts. We're only really taking the local connection list as those with a need that we need to meet through policy, and there's not actually many on that list at all. As to the housing, we do have up and down years, and that's generally expected. And I think what we're doing at the moment is contacting a lot of landowners to check what their plans are, and we're looking again at all our sites to see if there's anything that we've missed or anything where we can be pushing things forward and pushing for high capacities. But that's all we can do, but we are taking those steps at the moment.
Thank you. And I understand Rachel's got her hand up as well. Rachel, do you want to come in? Thank you.
Thank you. No, Sarah said everything. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, any final questions then? Anyone on this report? And if not, can we move to look at some recommendations? Is there anything that is falling out of our discussion and the questioning for officers of recommendations related to this? We spent a lot of time on the student accommodation. Yes, please, Councillor Oettinger.
Try and get more data on unused student rooms. What sort of students are in these private blocks? I think that's what you were sort of edging towards, wasn't it? I think, yeah. For future years, I guess.
Okay, so a recommendation around data collection on the student rooms available and the types of students and the locations. Anyone want to add to that or expand on it? Yeah, Edward, please. Thank you.
So one of the things we say, isn't it, that the institutions like the Brooks or the colleges should be seeking to use the land that they have already to develop for housing for students. I know that we've obviously had college sites that have done that. I have to kind of pose this as a sort of question, but you know, is Brooks in a position with the land that they have and the buildings that they already have to use sites that are already under their control to ensure that they are accommodating more to the need of housing the students that are enrolled with them? I can say that I went to Mansfield College in my ward recently. They're looking at developing their site and adding more accommodation, not increasing the student numbers. I know that the sites that the colleges have are very different to the campus at Brooks, but nonetheless, it could be a question that's worth asking the university whether they're utilising the land that they have enough already.
David, would you like to come in on that and to help inform a recommendation that I think is maybe coming? Thank you.
I mean, I guess I'm not sure whether Sarah's going to chip in and say we have had those conversations. We could have those conversations. I think the thing I would just ask everybody to bear in mind is the AMR needs to reflect the delivery of the policies within the plan. So if you're making recommendations of things you'd like to see in the AMR, just need to frame it in the context of what's the policy in the local plan we're trying to do something to gain more data on or whatever, rather than that would be the most useful way of framing it. How is that additional information helping deliver greater transparency on the sort of effectiveness of the policy? I'm not aware of that conversation taking place, but Sarah will be chipping in if we had it. So that's definitely something you can take away as an action as well as a recommendation.
Thank you. Rachel, Sarah, would you like to add anything on that to advise us on the formulation of our recommendation? You're okay.
I can't really, because it's difficult because it's straying more into policy. But I would say we have had conversations with both universities about their potential on their own sites many times. Yes.
Okay, thank you. So reflecting on that, is there something that you would like to put forward as a recommendation for this annual monitoring report, to authority monitoring report, to contain information around either maybe not the conversations held, but something to do with the potential land that could come forward from these university sites to meet their unmet demand? Is that what you're looking to achieve? Yeah. Okay, getting a yes, that I'm summarising it correctly. So we would want a recommendation in this, that in the annual monitoring report, data is given on the related to the unmet demand of a university and where they have identified sites to bring forward to meet their demand. May I check with the officers that makes sense as a recommendation? Just are we framing that correctly?
It does, but I'm happy to liaise with Celeste tomorrow just to make sure we've got something and we can share that perhaps with you, Catherine.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Okay. All right. Any further recommendations? Yes, Councillor.
Just going to sort of observation where Brooks does appear to have land is not in the city, doesn't it? They've got a site out in Wheatley and a site in Potley, but they're not in the city, and the potential for them developing those sites would be great. But what can we do about that?
Yeah, I think that's a comment rather than a recommendation, but what we can do is note that maybe that could be split in the recommendation of data where they are they're holding that land within the city boundaries versus outside the boundaries, because clearly if it is just in Wheatley or somewhere a few minutes the other side of the boundary, given that the ring road generally is a boundary, it's still quite close to some of their facilities, so it wouldn't necessarily be very far away to meet their housing demand. Okay, all right, thank you. Any further points?
Hagen had his hand up.
Hagen,
but he's put it down. But I'm not sure if you.
Okay, yeah. Hagen, is there anything that you want to add? Just because you had your hand up at one point.
Unfortunately, it was a case of cat jumping on keyboard. So my
lovely. Well, little bit of excitement. There you go. Thank you. Okay, so unless there are any other points that we want to raise, we will leave our recommendations there. So we've got our two recommendations, one around for the authority monitoring report to contain data gathered on the student rooms, types, and to ensure that demand and supply, and this is for all educational institutions, and then also the recommendation about the land holdings by the universities to meet their unmet demand. Okay, well, I'd like to thank you for your time today. Louise has to go elsewhere, I think, so thank you. Enjoy your parish council. Thank you, David, for attending this item, and to all of you online as well who are attending. So Sarah and Lorraine as well, thank you for that. Okay, so we're going to just see, does anyone need the toilet at this stage? We have agreed that we would, between agenda items, if anyone did need a toilet break, there is a facility for that. Nobody is needing a break at this stage, so we'll move straight on then to our next agenda item, which is the Thriving Community Strategy Update. This was originally item number 7. We have, I understand, do we have Councillor
McCongle.
So Councillor McCongle is here in person, so I'd like to invite you here to sit with us. We've got Councillor Ashad online, so welcome. Lubna for Cabinet Member Safe at Oxford. And I understand we've got Peter Matthew. Hi, Peter. We can see you on the screen there. Thank you. And Hagen we've seen already, so thank you. And is Paula here as well? And Paula's there too. So I would like to welcome you all and invite Councillor McCongle to introduce the report, please.
Thank you so much. This is a progress report that we want to update you what we have been up to since we produced this Thriving Community Strategy. First of all, I just want to thank officers. As you can see, this involves talking to hundreds of residents and our partners. So it's not solely our doing, but we need the input of others to produce this report. I also want to thank the councillors, Councillor Smith, Councillor Ashad, and Councillor Hollingworth for their input, because this strategy involves different cabinet members. As you all know, this strategy was produced as a result of citywide conversation with hundreds of people and partners. It is all about working together with communities and partners in Oxford to ensure all residents can live their lives to the full. It is important also to note that this strategy is a pillar to this council's corporate plans. It commits this council to continue to hold citywide conversation with our partners and to update cabinet members annually. So this is what we are doing right now. As you can see from the report, there are about 11 success measures that are detailed in the report. One that comes out to me, all of them are equally important, but measure 4, for example, to reduce the number of children leaving primary school who cannot swim 25 meters from 4 to 2 in 10. As you can see in the report, we identify the problem. We are doing it with our leisure partners, and there's a lot of things we have done. There's also some difficulties in terms of data and engaging other schools. So just want to recommend to you to note this report and ask questions. Before I conclude, probably my colleague, Councillor Lubina, might want to say something before we pass it to the officers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cherry. And Councillor Ashad, Lubna.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, we are really pleased to introduce the update on this progress, because obviously the Thriving Community Strategy is a key element of our council's corporate plan. It seeks to address the inequalities highlighted in Oxford together on leisure, culture, community initiatives, and it fosters the collaboration with partners to share our resources and deliver better outcomes for our residents. The strategy has already attracted 2.8 million in external funding from national bodies, and I think it demonstrates the positive impact on our partnership working. So already, as you guys know, we're developing our locality plans. Works underway to finalise locality plans by April 2025, prioritising the health inequalities, the cost of living support, and the youth opportunities. And also, the Oxfordshire Food Strategy and the City Food Action Plan are helping to reduce our food-related inequalities through our community larders and systems. As you can see, the localities are structured now into 4 quadrants, so it's ensuring tailored support across our city. Then, not but least, supporting community impact and our diversity. So we've got Oxford Community Impact Fund that's redistributed 1.5 million annually, with 20% of the funds just allocated to new applicants. So it's improving our diversity among our recipients. We've also got active engagement that's increased volunteer and trustee diversity with our significant representation from our underrepresented groups. And then we've got our youth ambition and our physical activity. So just so that everyone knows, over 1,700 young people have participated in 330 sessions, with 50% from BAME backgrounds. And a new youth hub in the Lees is supported by 1.3 million and funding, which is set to open in 2025. So programs like You Move and Move Together have reduced GP visits by 36%, supporting over 2,000 participants from priority neighbourhoods. And obviously, we're continuing to enhance our community infrastructure. Bullingdon community centres reopen. We're progressing on East Oxford and Blackburn Leys community centres, and investments of 3 million in leisure centres and 800k in new multi-activity hub at Bury Knoll have boosted accessibility and activity options. And lastly, the environmental sustainability. We've got 110k in Sports England funding that supported energy efficient upgrades in our leisure centres, including solar panels and LED lighting, with a further 7.5 million investment in retrofitting, 300 council homes to reduce carbon emissions and energy bills. And our next steps will be to continue to deliver on the strategies of the 11 mentioned by Councillor Choe Makonge, of our success working with our partners to ensure progress on key priorities such as tackling those inequalities, supporting our young people, and enhancing our sustainability. So this report highlights how our collaboration has targeted investment and community engagement, and I'm hoping that you guys will be part of this to enable us to thrive. So looking forward to the questions.
Thank you very much, Lubna. Excellent. And so has Peter and any of the officers online would you like to add to what we've heard from the Cabinet members, please?
Nothing to add from me, Councillor.
Thank you. So any questions then from the floor? Yeah, we've got Councillor Jarvis, please, and Councillor Ottino. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. I have a handful of questions which might make sense to break up, but I'll just keep going until I get told to stop. So just to kick off with, just broadly about the report, there's obviously a lot of the sort of measures that are listed in there within the strategy have the words increase or reduce in them. And Councillor Makonge earlier mentioned the difficulty getting data around school swimming, but there's a number of other of the measures there where there's not comparative data. We've got data which is like what's happening now, but not what's happened previously. And that's not particularly useful about measuring whether something is increased or reduced. So I guess the question really is like whether that comparative data does exist on those other measures, appreciating the issue around school swimming that was mentioned already, and whether we could see that and get a sense of that. I guess the other thing is the measures are useful in one sense in that they are suggesting that a number goes up or a number goes down. They're unuseful in another sense in that they don't say by how much. And so if we increase the number and diversity of young people taking part in Oxford's Youth Ambitious Services by 1, is that a success or is that not a success? So there's that. And then two other broad questions, I guess, about the strategy and its implementation in relation to the leisure contract, because obviously a huge proportion of this work is actually being done by more leisure by the outsourced provider. I guess the first question I have around that is what's the process through which the relationship exists between the council and more leisure in terms of the implementation of the strategy? And then I think if we were looking at a report from say, for example, the head of finance in the council about more leisure, we'd be getting a very different report in terms of objectives and measures to be looking at than we are in the Thriving Community strategy. And, you know, the report from the head of finance might be looking more at, for example, the scale of the management fee that we're extracting from the provider. And this is looking at the sort of social impacts that we're having through our services. And the former, you would be looking at trying to sweat the assets as much as possible, get as many paying customers through the door, closing off free access to free services and so on. Whereas in this strategy, we're looking at, you know, how do we open things up to give more provision of free services and so on for different groups and engagement in I guess different activities that don't produce revenue through the management fee. So I guess the question I have really is how is that tension managed in terms of our relationship with the provider between seeking to use the contract that we have with them and their role as the provider to extract that management fee, which then gets ploughed back into services elsewhere in the council, and delivering the social value that we want to deliver through this strategy, if that makes sense. Hopefully those were clear.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jarvis. I'll put those questions to the Cabinet members and also to the officers who'd like to respond first, please. Councillor Makonge, and then
Yeah, I just wanted to pass it over to Peter or Hagan.
Peter, go ahead then, or Helen. Hagan. Hagan, I think it's been
Yes.
passed over to you.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, thanks so much, Chair. So I'll pick up the Circa one first of all, which this first year working with Circo is a baselining exercise. So we will be working with Circo and partners to really sort of determine what our baseline KPIs are. The measure which is picked up in the Thriving Community Strategy will be just one of several measures that we will be looking to monitor Circo Leisure on. So, for example, one example was free swimming. We'll certainly be looking to monitor the success of that. Social impact, similarly, we'll be looking at a social impact measure. We'll be looking at participation by demographic group. So all of these items will form part of their business planning. Now, within their business planning, this work has just started ready for next year. So the next 2 to 3 months, we will be having regular meetings through our client meeting construct, so our governance, to really sort of bottle down exactly what the baselines are. So we're getting some good data which is coming in through our client reports at the moment in relation to baselines, but this is data obviously that we will, as Councillor Jarvis rightly says, need to be in a situation where for next year we can say we had X many attendees on the free swimming program. So the following year, we look to exceed that by X amount. So that's part of the business planning process, obviously, for which needs to be conducted this year, ready for KPIs to go into planning for next year.
But can I just add to that slightly before you move on, Hagan? So going back to Councillor Jarvis's point, which I think is a really good question about, and if I replay it back, is there a tension between the pursuit of the financial impacts as well as the social impacts? And I think to a large extent, this was the type of question that we wrestled with as part of the tender process. And I think this was at the heart of the evaluation of tenders. Could we achieve the social value impacts that we wanted? And I think we spent a lot of time with the tenderers trying to assess what were they offering by way of the social value against actually the overall impact of the proposal in terms of the financial position. So I think to a large extent, we considered that juxtaposition as part of the actual tender evaluation process, which led us to actually the selection that says what Circo were offering in terms of social value we thought was deliverable, alongside what they're offering in terms of the dividends and the financial returns, which we also assessed that both were actually deliverable and to some extent compatible. So I think that was built into the actual decision to actually go with that tender.
Thank you, Peter. Chris, your questions answered. Yeah.
The second two were the first two.
Yeah, so the first two questions from Chris's side around the comparative data. And so is it possible for that data to be added in future updates of this, or at least be made available if it is available already, but just not included? And
yeah, and then I guess the second one was about the what scale and of increases and reductions are we looking at? Because increase and reduction can be very different.
Yeah, Peter, back to you. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll have a go, and then I think it might vary according to measures. But my overall take, and it's another good question, I think it's because it's early days, and these are the first attempt at actually reporting back against this data set. So much of the actual data we're reporting on is relatively new. So I think, and I think Hagan picked it up to some extent, we need to actually give some longevity to the data sets to then be able to compare backwards. But having said that, I think it's well worth us having a look to see whether we can give some comparative analysis, which I understand the point being made in terms of actually what is the data really telling us about what is success. And I think we can look at that and then come back on that. I think it's a very good point made.
Thank you. Councillor Ortino, I think you've got some questions, please. And anyone else, show your hand. Okay, take it.
Yeah, obviously this is the first time I've seen this strategy. I'm sort of, I found it quite difficult to follow because I sort of automatically looked at the measures and they seem to be just from a whole huge breadth of areas. Some quite smart sort of targets, easily measurable, obviously something the city council is in control of, like building our community centres. Others, not necessarily the city council's responsibility or wholly, and again, not particularly measurable or very easily measured. I'm sort of a bit intrigued by measure one. These locality plans, I mean, April 2025 is pretty close. I don't know if any members have been contacted about their own areas. Would have thought that would have happened by now. So I'm wondering whether really anything much has happened there. The swimming thing. I mean, I was a primary school teacher, taught swimming. Not all schools even use city council pools for their swimming lessons. I struggle to see how the city council can have a huge impact on that. It might be a more sort of better measurable thing. It's just a number of young people using our city council pools rather than going through schools. And then this sort of environmental thing tagged on the end. Extremely difficult to measure. So yeah, I'm wondering whether you finding each of the 11 measures equally easy to sort of report about against, and whether you perhaps thinking about maybe might reduce the number and be a bit more specific. Yeah, that's my question.
Thank you, Councillor Ottino. We'll come straight to you, Peter, and we'll come back to Diego in a moment on that. Are there perhaps also lessons learned for the next update of this strategy, I guess, is part of the question too. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to say it again. I think that's a really, really perceptive question. I think the answer I'll give is that we've reported it in this way because the strategy actually said that we should report back against these 11 measures. And in a way, that's the reason we are reporting back against the 11 measures. I agree that if you look at these measures, they do seem to be a very interesting collective of output type measures. And you could ask that question, is it really telling you to what extent are you delivering a thriving community? So I think we fully accept that. But I think what we've presented is what the strategy said and Cabinet approved, that we must report back and update against those 11 measures. When I met with members, lead members, one of the questions I did raise was along the lines of the question, really, looking ahead, should we be thinking of updating in a more precise way, in a more outcome-focused way? And that does mean thinking through a smaller group of outcomes and actually presenting that smaller group of outcomes and trying to demonstrate the extent to which we are or are not realizing them. So I think that's going to be work that will be done in the year ahead. But I think for this first report, we are basically following the strategy and what it required us to do in terms of reporting back to Cabinet against these 11 prescribed measures.
Thank you. Does that answer your question? Yeah, thank you. So Diego, please. Councillor McConaughey, sorry, you please add to this. Thank you.
Yes, just to follow up to what Peter said, I've got evidence that most schools have started using our leisure centres. I know St. Joseph, where my child goes, uses the Lees, and I visited the ferry pool. I had witnessed some school children coming in to use our pools. If you look in the report as well, Simon, Knowledge have employed somebody who is working with our schools to encourage them to use our pools. As much as we don't this is our first report. We should recognize the efforts that are being put in order to encourage our primary schools to use our POS. If it wasn't in the report, then that couldn't have been outlined or people knowing about it. We should also link up with our under 17 free swimming. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Makonge. Councillor Grace, please.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me? Okay. My questions is more specific of the word I represent, little more about health and well-being. Okay. What I would like to know is some examples or measures are being taken to address health inequalities in Littlemore, and how are these X4 being monitored and evaluated? And the second question is about health and promotion events. I'm not sure if you can share with us some more details about health promotion events held in Littlemore and their impact on the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who'd like to take that question? Those questions around that. Peter?
I think that's Hagan.
Is that Hagan again? Hagan, please.
Yeah, no problem at all. Thanks so much, Chair. So again, I think this is diving down into a bit of detail around Littlemore in itself. Clearly, we've got programs which cross Littlemore, and obviously are some of our region areas such as Move Together and You Move. I'd have to take it away to look at the exact detail of which residents and numbers are associated with Littlemore in particular. So I need to take that away. In relation to health promotion events, so these are going on again, but these are more focused in our priority areas, not Littlemore at this moment in time. Very focused on obviously key bits within those areas. So tackling issues around food, obesity, looking at sort of physical activity for those who are more inactive. Those are the type of items which are covered within those, but not within Littlemore at this moment.
Yeah, okay. Okay, anyone else? I've got a few questions myself, but yeah, Edward, and then Simon. Yeah. Edward, please.
Hi, yeah. I think what Councillor Otina was saying about the swimming lessons is quite pertinent. That really it's a curriculum issue when it comes to children not having. Obviously, we need, as a local authority responsible for the leisure centres, we obviously need to make sure that we're getting children in those leisure centres as much as possible. But really, ultimately, I mean, I think they should be doing it in school time every week. That's what I was doing when I was a kid. I think that it would be better. In terms of measure 2, there's a pie chart of the geographic areas of Oxford. I found that a bit confusing because it does rightly have a lot of focus on the most deprived parts of Oxford, but it doesn't seem to have anything under West Oxford or Headington. It does say Barton, but I don't know whether that's just that those areas don't get any input, or whether there's some other reason for that, and perhaps that could be clarified. And also, I do have a recommendation. Actually, I'll just save that as a recommendation. I don't think I've got a question about that. So, yeah, that's what I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just to add on the pie chart, because I had a question specifically on that too. Yeah. A bit about like why so little in North Oxford. I know that there is a demographic element, but there's also pockets of deprivation there. So why are these grants not being distributed to certain areas of the city? I think we had Councillor Otina had another point to add, and I do too. But maybe if you take those first, and then we'll come back to those. Thank you.
Shall I come in now?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah.
Just to explain that the pie charts come from the self-selected options that are ticked by and included by grant applicants at the time of applying and then at the time of monitoring as well. And they choose particular areas where they are only working in that area, or they choose whole city or broader demographics if they have activity in a particular place, but that activity attracts people from a wider area, if that makes sense. And the grantees that are within that are the big ideas grantees. So these are our strategic grants over 3 years. But we have separate data for our small and medium grants, whereby there is targeted work in other areas such as West Oxford and the North as well. So the strategic funding, as you might expect, is focused on our particular target areas and whole city, but the small and medium grant data would show a different picture.
Okay, thank you very much. Any further comments from officers or cabinet members on this? No, in which case then we'll go to our additional questions. I think Councillor Ottino and then myself, final takers for additional questions. I'm looking at those who've not spoken. Okay, Councillor Ottino, please.
Yeah, I suppose I'm looking at measure 6, the reducing physical inactivity one. I'm just wondering how residents would be aware of this, that this is what we're trying to do. I'm not sure I was particularly aware of it. Is this just GPs referring people? I mean, there's an awful lot of people that don't go to their GP. Yeah, what's been the most successful way of sort of getting people into these programs, and where do you think we are failing to get people into take up these opportunities?
Thank you. And I think I'll add my questions as well so that you can take them all together. One relates to the early pregnancy unit at Rosehill, and I want to first of all thank you for providing that service. I understand it's very valued, so that initiative is excellent. But the question really is, as part of that, is that being then connected with third sector support to ensure that women and their partners have 24-hour support when the early pregnancy unit is not open? So that's the first question. And the second point is around data, because we keep on coming back to that. To what extent is some of the data disaggregated by males and females? And I ask this particularly because swimming can be a gendered, there can be like a gender gap in those who learn to swim from specific community groups, and wonder whether that is looked into so interventions can be more targeted. And likewise, there's some efforts are being focused around those residents with Parkinson's and dementia. Do we know, what the level of demand is for people with these conditions, given that's a growing issue with an ageing population, which we have in the city? And then the third data point, again, is it related to youth ambition? And we know that girls do drop off significantly in the numbers who do sport when they're in the teenage years. And so are you tracking the gender breakdown there as well? Self-declared. Thank you. So those are, the questions in addition to Simon's questions. Back over to...
I think Egan will take that one.
Chewy, please.
Egan.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chair and Councillor Monconge. So just picking up on the first question from Councillor Tino. So comms in relation to this. We work with GPs, we get and social prescribers within the area, so we get referrals through that. I always feel that's a really good route which works really well. There's a identification there at the time that they're then obviously referred through that process. Now, people can self-refer, so we've got details in through our website, and we often put out social media messages and also look at target interventions, so posters in certain areas, sometimes some leaflets, although we'll rely more on social media targeting. But I think in relation to what works best and what works not as well, certainly the best what we found in regards to success is those who are referred through social prescriber or GP areas. We need to do some more comms in relation to this. So if it hasn't reached Councillor Ottino, I don't think we've done as much as we can do. So there is obviously some more to be done around how we better target going forward, which it will include, obviously in this case, councillor comms as well. In relation to the next question, which was Councillor Miles' share, so the EPAU, so the Early Pregnancy Assessment Unit at Rose Hill, that's been doing brilliantly well. We had a visit from the Chief Medical Officer just over a year ago. They lauded it as best practice within the community. It was one of their first forays into community settings. The feedback that we've had from those using it at the community centre has been really positive, and as you can imagine, a real step change in relation to how obviously people using the assessment unit felt, rather than going to the John Radcliffe, which could be very traumatic indeed. So the feedback that we've had has been really positive in relation to that work. It is controlled by the NHS, so of course the after work and any other work associated with that would need to be done through the NHS. We will always support individuals who come to the centre if they are funneled into us to look at interventions, but the main work around aftercare would be through the NHS, and we can check with the NHS if you would like specifics in relation to that. Next question about do we differentiate for our programs on males and females? Yes, absolutely. That's something which we do, and we have data within our leisure centres, within our activity programs, which does disaggregate in relation to that. So we could show that with examples going forward. Next question was around levels of demand with ageing population. So again, we do monitor this. So Move Together obviously is an example of how we might track that data and disaggregate obviously populations to ensure that we are targeting the right populations, and actually that usage is very clear about whether we're increasing or decreasing in relation to that. And in relation to youth ambition, yes, again, similarly, we do track whether it's male or female data that's coming in. We were close to 50-50 at the last count. So I think female population is just slightly below at the moment. But again, we can really show some really good examples. We have all go work youth work groups, which again have really supported young women and girls in relation to youth work activities as well.
Thank you very much. Okay, first of all to Councillor Makonge, and thank you, Hagen, for the comprehensive answer. And then I think Councillor Ottino's got a follow-up after that, please.
Yes, thank you so much. Just to add on what Egan has said, I'm just looking at the photo here from Youth Ambition. Actually, the photo was called because we are opening up the start of the construction of the youth hub. In that photo, Councillor Ottino was there as well. There's 50-50 split. So just to add what Egan was saying, thank you.
Thank you. And I understand that Peter, it's not showing on my screen, but I understand you've got your hand raised. So Peter, would you like to...
Sorry, I haven't got my virtual hands. I seem to be waving automatically for some reason. The point I was just to add to what Hagen was saying, and I think the point I'd raise, and I think the questions are well put, but this is an incredibly important area, because I think this is really about we as a council initiating activities and actions to promote health. And one of the reasons it's crucially important is actually being able to engage with the ICB and the health service. Because from the other end of the spectrum, they too are looking to how can they promote community-based health, integrated neighborhood health arrangements. So I think much of this, yes, some of it is new, it is developing, and yes, we'll develop our capabilities in terms of capturing our performance. But I think it is that point about actually we need to try and develop more and more initiatives with communities around the physical health agenda in order to join up with the ICBs and the health agenda. And I think that will be an incredibly powerful agenda in the years to come. And I think so we need to just keep our eyes on that horizon.
Thank you. No, that's helpful. Councillor Tino, and then we'll move on to a discussion for recommendations. Councillor Tino.
Yeah, a question about Measure 1, the locality plans. I mean, have you got any sort of sense what these might look like? It's fairly soon, they're due, and the 4 areas are quite, I mean, I'm glad Leeds is just quite a small area, but OX 1 and 2 sounds like a huge area, as there's all of them apart from OX Leeds, basically. And Catherine's right, there are inequalities all over the city, not just on our estates. Are some of these places just too broad an area to come up with a sort of coherent locality plan? I'm sure it will work on Leeds. I think even Littlemore, Rosehill and East Oxford, I presume that means Cowley, because it's not mentioned anywhere else as well. That's a pretty huge area. Is it realistic? And what do can you give us an idea of what they're going to sort of be like?
Thank you, Councillor Tino. Valuable question. So looking ahead, Peter, is this best for you? Who would you like to direct the question to?
I think Paula could have a stab at it and I'll come to.
Thank you, Paula, then over to you. Thanks.
Yes, so I think that through COVID, we learned that in order to best address the changed needs of communities, we did that in a collaborative spirit with a range of partners that differed within different settings. And I think that we've built upon those different relationships to the extent that we have different networks and activities and support to communities in different areas. And I think that going forward, we're now at a point where we need to look at how we continue that bespoke local approach, but also with a strategic overview and focus. And that's where the work that's the work that we're doing now, is looking at the connection between the wider focus of the council priorities, but with that local bespoke approach too. And it's not easy to do, and it's in progress.
As Tino, does that?
Yeah, I mean, is there going to be a resource issue in terms of if you want to do stuff, you need money or at least officer time to do it? How is that going to fit in? Or is that already costing?
Paula, back to you.
So I think the whole kind of premise really of the strategy is that this isn't us doing things on our own. This is us working in connection with our partners. We've talked about public health, but also other statutory and voluntary sector partners too. So the resource, there is resource already in place. But the question is, how is that focused across different partnerships across the city? We are elements of that have been picked up within the community services review, and that will be taken forward in due course.
Thank you very much, Paula. So at this point, I think we're starting to draw to our recommendations from what we've heard from officers, unless there are any final burning questions, but I think we've had lots of stabs at trying to extract some information that's useful to formulating them. Just to recap, I think we've got a number points that have come up or themes that we might want to have recommendations around. First is around the comparative data, partly in response to the point that Chris made to begin with, but then, and this refers to both time scale, but also maybe any gender gaps in terms of some of the threads within the performance reporting, which clearly data is collected, but maybe it's not being reported on. So there's something around that. There's possibly something around lessons learned on reporting and measures, monitoring and evaluation of the strategy. There was something on that theme. It sounds like we've done some amazing work with the EPU, the early pregnancy unit, and maybe is there a case study opportunity there? I'd like to put that out there. Just if this is like national good practice, best practice, we need more data when it comes to maternal health in early pregnancy and successful intervention approaches. So could some kind of case study be useful with the third sector to promote what good work's been done? There was a theme of swimming as well. Was there something around the swimming? Partly it was about data, but I think there was some points that were raised around something else, something on communications. And then, yeah, I think the lessons learned probably ties into the breadth of the locality plan. So anyone want to come back on those themes for recommendations? I think Councillor Mundy, you had said specifically there was something. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. So in relation to measure 6, physical activity, bearing in mind the motion that was passed at last council on making the city more walkable, I think it would be pertinent to include reference to that motion under measure 6 to make it clear that the council is committed to ensuring that those parts of the city where walking, where physical activity is its most deprived, as it were, should be the focus of our attention when it comes to making the city more walkable and ensuring that people are getting that most accessible form of exercise, which is to walk. Thank you.
Thank you. Well noted. I think I can see some nods of the heads there. So a recommendation on that. Celeste, do you have the wording for that? Excellent. Thank you. On the data point then, so if we're accepting that recommendation from Councillor Mundy, thank you. Councillor Jarvis, have you got anything around the recommendation you'd like to see on that, please?
Yeah, I think it'd be useful to have a recommendation both on the comparative data and on the gender data that you suggested. So not necessarily certain on the wording of those, but I think it'd be useful to have something on those. Yep.
Oh, I think I pressed a doorbell, but anyway, someone else wants to join the meeting. No. So with that, then I think we're taking a recommendation or tabling a recommendation around for the Thriving Community Strategy Progress Reports that data, comparative data on over time and to show the scale and any potential gender gaps is there. Obviously, it's not providing every single data point, but it's around useful data that can provide context to the narrative report, I think is what we're requesting. I'm seeing nods of heads, no one's disagreeing with that proposal. So table that recommendation too. On the lessons learned, on the monitoring and evaluation, was there a broad recommendation on that, or are we satisfied that the data point will cover what we need for that?
So we have to stick with these measures, or is there?
I think for the duration of this particular strategy, yeah. But that does come to an end relatively soon. So have you got a recommendation beyond that you wanted to put forward?
Well, then all measures should be smart, shouldn't they? And they're not that, I would say. Some of them are quite sort of broad and vague, and I'm not sure how helpful that is, unless there's a way of tweaking them to pick up something that aspect of it is measurable.
So are we suggesting as a group that we would like to identify some lessons learned for measurement of the next iteration of the strategy to inform a refined approach for the next time. Would that be a useful recommendation to table? Lesson learned paper, or just for to track at the appropriate moment in the preparation for the next strategy? Yeah. Sounds sensible. Councillor Tino? Where it can be, yeah. Does that work for you? Have you got appropriate notes on that? Okay, so we'll put a recommendation around that. And then the point that I raised about the case study on the early pregnancy unit, do you feel that that's appropriate, that we document maybe our success stories, and that being one that we might want to choose? Yeah, we've got notes of heads. So if we could put that down as document the success, given that the Chief Medical Officer went to visit it, and there's a lot of work, I think, that is being done around early pregnancy success stories that can be disseminated nationally. Thank you. So final recommendation.
Around measure 1, could we have sort of a recommendation that members are involved in their locality plans, or have some sort of chance to meet with the person that's writing them?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Stairs.
I'm going to suggest that we have something around equity in the city, that there are other areas of deprivation that could benefit from some of these measures.
Okay, so with the locality plan, would there be a opportunity? Do we need to recommend? And I guess this is a question maybe to Peter, since you're still on the line. Will there be a formal process already for councillors to feed into this process of the update of the locality plan, so that the relevant ward councillors will be able to feed into the one relevant to their ward? Thank you.
Yeah, so my understanding is that there should be engagement with members, but I suspect it does no harm if you want to reinforce that point.
Thank you. In which case then we reinforce that point with the recommendation put forward by Councillor Tino. And to Councillor Stairs' point around equality in the whole city, how would you like to see that addressed? Is it, because I understand the principle, is this with the update of the locality plans as well, that this emphasis that it's there is a focus of recognition of the principle inequality exists everywhere in the city? Yeah, okay. So as part of the consultation, the recommendation referring to ensuring the involvement of all relevant ward councillors in the locality plans, we would like to put forward as scrutiny the overarching principle that we recognise that deprivation exists throughout the whole of the city, and that it is not isolated in just specific pockets, notwithstanding there is degrees of deprivation. Is that what you would like to see, Councillor?
Okay, just jumping on that, because I could see your sentence getting longer and longer there, and I think that to me is part of the difficulty on this one, right? Because part of the reason why we named the places is because we want to do targeted work in the areas that have the highest level of deprivation and inequalities. And I think as Scrutiny Committee, over the last 2 or 3 years that I've been on it, we've gone round the houses on this a number of times about what we deem to be the better way of dealing with this, I think at various points we referred to inequalities, and we've referred to OX4, at other points we referred to specific areas, the Lees, Littlemore and so on. At other times we've mentioned specifically Donington Estate and Cutterslow as 2 areas that are in otherwise wealthy areas that have pockets of deprivation. And I guess I'm not sure what the usefulness of this, where the usefulness going around the house on this again is, because I think, yes, there are pockets of deprivation across the whole city, but as a council, we recognise the areas where that is highest and where we can do the most targeted work, and that's, I think, important. But I'm sort of speaking aloud, but yeah, speak my thoughts aloud. But I guess the specifics are useful, and making it more vague, I'm not necessarily sure is, I don't know.
So just maybe in response to this, just a thought is that given that this recommendation is coming up when we're talking about the future locality plans that are being created, that within those, that it's very clear, I mean, whether it's been done in the past or not, but within each of the plans, which are the areas that are of most relevant to that locality plan, because, you know, representing a ward in North Oxford, people will tell me all the time there's no poverty in North Oxford, but then when you speak to certain people and you meet certain residents, you know that it does actually exist. So we, you know, within these plans, we do need to highlight that there are these pockets, and if there are named pockets that we want to highlight because of factors relating to that locality, then it would be a place to address them in these new locality plans for those areas. And hopefully that would address your point, Councillor Stairs. Yeah, thank you, because we do need to give that recognition. As Councillor says that it's everywhere, but also that we need targeted approaches to those that are most of need. Does that satisfy everybody's concerns to make sure that, yeah, we're not reinventing the wheel, but also making sure what we do is targeted and not excluding people that are in need? Yeah. Okay. So I think we've got a few recommendations there. Starting with that walkable city one, yeah, the locality plan and lessons learnt. We've got the comparative data one and the EPU case study. So I think that covers everything. 5 recommendations. Thank you. Which probably reflects the value that we place on the work that you're all doing. So thank you very much to the Cabinet members and officers for your valuable work in this area and continued progress. It's really pleasure to read through what you're doing. Obviously, there's always scope for improvement, and that's why we're here to scrutinise, but we want to thank you for your good work on this. Thank you for your time. Okay, I think we've approached the end of that item and we move to our standing items, which is purely administrative, I think, really at this stage. So we go back to our agenda on our minutes from the last meeting we've covered already. So we move then to the work plan and forward plan, which is item number 5. Yes. Just on that, there was a supplement that was circulated to you just shortly before the meeting, which lists the most up-to-date version of the reports coming forward. We do have quite a hefty meeting in January, just to forewarn you. So prepare for a long one and prepare also for prepare for both of them. But also, yeah, you might need some time for reading as well before that, given that there's so many documents. Has anyone got any questions on that work plan? We need to just confirm that we all agree to it. Thumbs up. Okay. And just to highlight, that's where I listed this new item, which is the government's updating the lessons learned, and that refers to these urgent decisions that have been made recently, having to come to the Chair of Scrutiny. Okay, so then we move. Yeah,
Chair, just to say that's okay. Just to add something,
please,
just would like to say that a couple of items were actually added to the long list of scrutiny items, including financial crime and reporting system on licensed premises. I think this is more specific on noise complaints, as we had spoken outside of the meeting of Councillor, and that's just something that I wanted to add on the work plan. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions about either of those? No. Okay, so then what we move to is the report back on recommendations from the last meeting. Just to say that this is item number 8, but was item number 6 on the original document or agenda. The committee and its panels made a total of 7 recommendations to Cabinet at its last November meeting, and 1 recommendation to the shareholder joint venture group. You can see the full responses in your meeting packs, but if you did have any questions, you're welcome to ask them. I'll hand over to Celeste in case there's anything you want to update on the panel's recent activities. Thank you.
Yes, just very briefly, Chair. The Climate and Environment Panel met on the 20th of November to consider 4 substantive items. They made a total of 4 recommendations across 2 reports, which will be presented to Cabinet on the 11th of December at its meeting. And then an extraordinary housing and homelessness panel was also held on the 27th of November to consider 3 reports for Cabinet. They made 2 recommendations, which will also be presented to Cabinet on the 11th of December.
Thank you very much, Celeste. So then moving, so I think we just note that, unless anyone's got any questions, thank you, noted. Therefore, dates of future meetings. Just to let you know, I don't think it's completely updated in the document pack that you have in the around the 1st of April meeting, but we are moving that on a request from Councillor Latif because Eid is expected to fall on that date. We're going to move that meeting to the 26th of March instead to ensure that we've got full participation of our colleagues and who can also then celebrate. But we might have to make some arrangements for prayers and food eating as well on that date potentially. So we look at that nearer at the time and take the appropriate date. So any other questions? Otherwise, we've finished, I think, our agenda. Thank you very much to Celeste, to Hannah, and to all of you for coming, and yeah, good night.